Let's build a bot in Python, this time for Discord. Hi everybody, I'm James Powell, and today in our session we'll be building a bot for the Discord platform using Python. We'll cover all of the basics of building a simple echo hello bot that can carry on a conversation, but we will get very deep into some of the mechanics of how we might structure those conversations, making use of tools like asynchronous IO as well as asynchronous generators. We're going to take a look at not only the basics of how do we build a Discord bot using Python, but also some very strange aspects of how async IO coincides or works together with mechanisms like asynchronous coroutine generator structures. How do we asynchronously pump something? How do we fit all of these pieces together? Well, why don't we take a look? We'll jump right in. And so in order to jump right in, I'll share my screen with you. Behind me, you'll see my screen. I will, of course, hide in the corner here, and let's take a look. Well, of course, as always, if we're going to start with building a bot, we need to understand how it is that we get ourselves set up for that. And in the case of the Discord platform, it's actually relatively easy. Once we have an account for ourselves, which, as we know, is relatively easy for us to register for. We don't even have to provide a phone number. We just have to go to the Discord developer portal, and on the developer portal, we can create a new application, and from there, we can create our test bot. Now here I'll show you the general steps along the way, but we've done some of these steps behind the scenes. There's really not a whole lot more that you have to do here. You may need to go to this OAuth panel and choose how you want to set up your bot. Here I'd set up a bot with maybe administrator permissions. Initially when I'm just testing, I might not want to worry too much about permissions. And for the most part, other than perhaps giving the bot a slightly nicer name, maybe turning it off for public usage, and we'll talk about this in a moment, setting up the right intents, giving it the ability to view at least message contents, there really isn't that much more. With that, we have a bot. Now, on the other end, how do we interact with this bot? Well, Discord provides us with both an HTTP and a WebSocket API. The HTTP API, of course, is going to have its limitations. Do we really want to be repeatedly polling for things like new messages that have come in? And so it is the case that we probably want to start with the WebSocket API so that we can have new messages pushed to us that our bot can be responsive. If we think about the simplest hello world example for a bot, it would be an echo bot, a bot where when you say something to it, it says that back to you with maybe a slight modification to the message. So for example, taking a lowercase message and uppercasing everything. That proves your ability to connect to the platform, as well as your ability to receive messages and respond to messages. If you were to think of the next phrase from there, it might be a simple conversational bot where you say hello, and it responds hello. You say, how are you? It responds, I'm doing well. You say goodbye, and it responds goodbye. And you can think from there, you can extend that to being able to answer questions. And you could connect that to maybe a large language model, so you could increase the ability of the bot to answer questions. You might wonder why it is the case that you might go through the mechanics that we're going to go through, even though we might connect this bot to a large language model. You might say, why do I need to manage the state within the bot, within my Python code, even though the large language model maybe has some internal state modeling? But you can think that there may be some additional actions or some external state that the large language model can't capture. For example, you might want to know that this is a conversation that has been newly initiated or a conversation that's long going. You may want to track some things across the conversation, like when was the last time they sent you a message? How frequently are they sending you messages? Things like that. And so you can think that the back and forth, even though that is something that your large language model would be able to handle, that is to say, if you say hello, it knows to say hello back to you. You don't need to tell it, oh, we're at the beginning of the conversation, so don't say goodbye. Well, even though that's the case, we're going to model the conversation just to synthesize the idea of there's going to be some external state or some state that you want to capture, even though the actual conversational contents handled by the large language model. I suspect we won't get to the point of being able to integrate this particular bot that we're going to build together with any large language model. There's a lot of additional work we might have to do to really come up with a good idea for where this is useful, but also to set up the APIs. And there's quite a bit of work we need to do just to get the initial Discord bot going. So why don't we take a look at what our next step is? Now, My general guidance when it comes to the Discord bot is let's try to avoid using the WebSocket API directly, in part because, at least for our simple example, it's going to be kind of ugly for us to deal with messages, decoding messages, and turning those into something that we can work with if the messages look something like this. It's very much the case when we work with the REST API, the endpoints tend to look like the sorts of things that we are familiar with, the entities that we're familiar with. Whereas when you think about WebSockets, every client or every exchange on that WebSocket has to have an agreed upon message protocol. And in the case of this WebSocket protocol, you can see it's quite slim, where we have this op representing the operation and then some parameters associated with that. I don't know that we want to mess with that. And so we'll look for a very light wrapping on top of it. And the wrapping that we'll choose for this session will be discord.py. Discord.py is a Python library that provides you with a wrapping on top of the Discord WebSockets API. So it should allow us to do some fairly simple things pretty easily. There are one or two downsides to the use of discord.py. For example, we don't control the event loop here. We'll see what that means in a moment. But why don't we see if we can implement the absolute simplest API using just the pieces we've put together. And so what we're going to do is we're going to implement a simple bot that maybe doesn't do anything interesting, maybe just lists what servers or what servers it is in. Now, if it's the case that we have this bot, we will have to add it to each of the servers. So here you can see I have a test server. Here you can see this bot is offline. If I've made any changes to the permissions of this bot, I might need to re-add it or reauthorize adding it. Here you can see this thing has been authorized to be added to this particular server. And you can see I have a couple of test channels. Note, when you look at the Discord API docs, they name things very slightly differently. We as Discord users will call this a Discord server, but the API will call this a guild. And so you'll see some of this terminology used interchangeably, not only in the discord.py docs, but also in the general Discord docs, and we'll also be using that terminology interchangeably. What we want to do initially is just show our presence, just understand that we're connected to, and we can see these two text channels as well as this one voice channel. And so with discord.py, it's actually quite straightforward for us to do this. Let's get the environmental variable where we have stored our Discord token. Unlike other APIs, Discord only requires a singular Discord token. It's a very long string. One thing is you better make sure that you store it somewhere safe, because once it's generated, you can only view it once before you have to refresh this. So behind the scenes, we viewed this, we've stored this somewhere, and we're feeding it into our application via the environment. And let's go into the Discord client, and we'll create our client. Now, a note, the Discord API includes permissions. So part of the idea of building these bots is I'm not just building a bot for myself, I'm building a bot that could be added to a marketplace that other people can use. And if some other person is going to be using this bot, well, they're going to want to know what that bot can do. Can it listen in on messages on my server or my guild? Can it add users, remove users? Can it take over my channel? Whatever the case may be. This is indicated via intents. And so we will tell our Discord bot that it's going to start with the default intents. Now, for the most part, this is enough, but we'll see that there's one specific intent correlating to one of those tick boxes that I had to change for this bot that we're going to need later. But let's create our client. Once we create our client, we can have our client run its own event loop. The discord.py library includes an event loop that listens to these WebSocket messages and then triggers particular actions on this. And so when we talk about an event loop, usually what we're talking about is some mechanism that operates behind the scenes that organizes the control flow as well as the data flow of our program. And here, what you can think is this client.run as a blocking call. It'll start in the background our Discord event loop. That event loop will connect to the Discord WebSocket API. And as WebSocket messages come in, it'll decode those messages, and then it'll dispatch those messages the particular callbacks that will register. And so very much like any other callback API you've used, even web frameworks, what we're going to do is we're going to register some callbacks. And we'll register the simplest possible callback. What we'll do is we'll register on ready. And on ready, we'll just trigger, once our bot is ready to go. So here, we won't do anything that interesting. We'll just print that we're ready. There we go. And here, behind the scenes, let's make sure that we have everything right. We're running this with our environment. We have our onReady event there. And we can see that we're ready to go. Now that we're ready to go, well, what else can we do? If we take a look at this client object, this represents the one individual client that we have. So one question that may come up as we take a look at everything that we're going to do is, what happens if I have multiple Discord bots that might exist within the same Python process and interact with each other? Well, we'll need some additional mechanisms, like we'll need to wrap all of this in some kind of object orientation in order to ensure that we only have one of these bots. But since this is a blocking loop, we'll have to figure out a way to join the two event loops. We'll have to start one of these things in another event loop, and it gets kind of confusing. And so in general, as a consequence of the way in which this library is written, for the most part, we're going to run one single bot instance within one single program. We won't be able to run multiple bots. Now, that is to say that the bot, of course, can be on multiple different servers, listening to multiple different channels. That's not a problem. It's just that we won't have the ability to run multiple distinct bots within the same Python process, which probably for most use cases is not something that we'll really need, so we won't worry too much about it. Let's take a look at what this client object has internally, and we'll see maybe what it allows us to do. And so we'll give it a moment for it to be ready, and we can see there's quite a bit of stuff here. Now, if I wanted to identify, for example, which channels I'm on, you can see there's a couple of getters where I can do things like get which channels I'm on. I'll even run a couple of these and show you what the responses look like. Now, in just a moment, we're going to come face to face with something that we already thought was complicated in the non-async IO world, and we're going to find has an additional level of complication in the async IO world. But let's do something like this. We'll do guilds. Of course, that's our term for the servers, and we'll also do get all channels. Now, when we do this, we'll see that these are both. The first one, is just the actual guilds that we belong to. And so here we can see that we are only added to one single guild, one single server. That is my some tester servers. But for this second call here, we can see that this is a generator. And in fact, it's here a regular generator, not an asynchronous generator. So we should be able to say for chan in client.getAllChannels. And we should be able to print out all the channels that we are connected. And so once we do that, we can see we get the category channels, we get the general channel, which is a text channel here and here, as well as the voice channel. Well, now that we do that, what would we want to do from there? Well, we might want to, for example, send a message on one of these channels, and this is where it gets kind of tricky. If I wanted to send an unsolicited or unprovoked message, a message separate from some callback that I get, separate from some response, well, I can't quite do that via these callbacks. If I want to send a message via response, that's fairly straightforward. That's just more or less what I have here, and I just have to figure out how I trigger on a message. And for the most part, I'm not a big fan of these you have to kind of guess the name APIs. So I'm not a huge fan of having to guess, is this on message, all lowercase with no underscore? Is it on messages, whatever the case may be? But here, for the most part, if we're starting with something simple, we can at least be willing to guess something like this. So here, we'll wait for a message. And this is how I might respond if my goal here is to wait for a message and then do something in response to that message. So see if we can do something here. We'll go into our test channel. We'll hide these users, so we'll just look at our test channel. Or to zoom out a bit here, we'll send a test message. And we'll see that we're able to actually see that test message right here. We can see a bunch of information about that test message. We can see where it was sent. That'll be useful later. We can see who it was sent by. That'll also be useful later. We can see the name of that. The one thing that we will not be able to do is see the contents of that message. Let me update this code very slightly, and I'll print out the message contents. And there we go. I'll send this message again, and I believe it's content in the singular, so we'll try that one more time. You can see no message content. Oh, it's kind of odd. What if I tag the bot itself? Well, it turns out, and let's get tagging here. I am limited in what I can see of the message content unless I add particular permissions. And under certain circumstances, I can see only things where I'm particularly tagged or I'm particularly addressed. If I were to, let's see if we can take a look at this bot, message this bot directly, see information, if that information was sent directly to the bot, okay, that's fine. But if it's in this test server, I can't just view all messages that were sent to this. And so you can think the reason for this is, well, you might want to create a bot that doesn't have the ability to snoop somebody's server's private conversations, but it may want to be added to every possible channel. And so this is the case where we'll need to add some additional intents.